The falsification principle is another philosophical attempt to challenge religious language for meaningfulness. The falsification principle is a cognitivist approach which claims that meaningful language is based upon fact and thus can be shown to be true or false. Thus, anything that cannot be falsified is meaningless. The key scholars relevant to this approach are Karl and Antony Flew. The falsification principle is the process whereby one would prove a statement to be false. A statement is only meaningful if we know what evidence can be used to count against it. This is a development of the verification principle, but which attempts to be more rigorous. It only takes one piece of evidence against a statement to prove that it must not be the case. Karl Popper developed this idea initially. If we return to some of the examples of language used in the last film, we could show that the statement, "all metals expand when heated," is falsifiable, because it would only take one example of a metal that does not behave in this way to make us say that the statement is false. It doesn't matter if we cannot find that elusive thing. What matters is that we know what we would have to do. Thus the statement is meaningful. Popper himself said that if a statement contains a proposition about what is real, then it must be possible to check it for falsity. If we cannot do that, then it is not a statement about reality. For instance, if I were to state that all swans are white, I am making a statement about the empirical world. This statement can be demonstrated to be false simply by finding one swan that is not white. Thus, it is falsifiable and meaningful. It is a proposition about reality. Antony Flew went on to develop this idea. He claimed that if we apply the falsification principle to religious language, then we can see that such statements are meaningless. There is nothing that we could find that could be used to count against religious statements, and so they are not falsifiable. If I were to make the statement God is good, then an atheist might claim, well, look at all the evil and suffering in the world around us. How would a good God allow that? The religious believer would say that it is not God's fault. It is us that causes the suffering. The atheist might respond by asking, what about natural evil? The Christian would say, that's not God's fault. But either it is our fault for messing up this perfect creation, or it is instructional. No matter what counter-evidence the atheist offers, the religious believer will not accept that a God is not good. No evidence can be allowed to count against this belief. Flew used wisdom's parable of the gardener to illustrate his point. Suppose two people return to a long-neglected garden after having been away a long time. As they look around, they see evidence of some plants being surprisingly vigorous. One companion concludes that a kind of gardener has been visiting and working on the garden in their absence, and that it has not been left alone. The other argues that there was no gardener because there is so much that has not been looked after. They devise a series of tests to check whether or not the gardener came. They ask neighbours, sit out to watch, set traps, but all the experiments prove to be inconclusive. The second companion says that clearly there is no gardener, but the first one holds still that the gardener visits. He qualifies how this can be the case if there is no evidence. It is possible that the gardener visits at night, in secret, or is invisible, intangible, incorporeal, and so on. Flew asks what is the difference between an invisible, intangible, incorporeal gardener and no gardener at all. Once God has been qualified in this way, he dies the death of 1,000 justifications. A religious believer will allow nothing to count against his claims, and so since we do not know what we can do to falsify such ideas, they are meaningless. It is important to know the difference between verification and falsification. Firstly, of course, the falsification principle is about being able to demonstrate that a statement is false rather than true. In fact, what makes it different is that it is more rigorous because it is a scientific method of checking facts. It requires repeated testing of a hypothesis, and it is only when there are no more tests to be done that we can declare a statement to be true. It only takes one observation of the statement not being the case for it to be false. In addition, when we challenge falsification, we can point out that it has little to do with language, whereas verification did. In fact, we might say that falsification is based on the observation that to claim something is true is to deny some other proposition. This is rigorous scientific methodology, but is not applicable to language.